starting the final panel, which is the topic of which is the role of the European Union in solving the Ukrainian crisis. This is the final panel, and at the start of it, we are already running half an hour behind the schedule. So let me start with some introductory remarks. I would like to remind you about the major theme, the major topic of our conference, Ukraine as a test for European solidarity, with a question mark, which I interpret as a very important question. Can the European Union really develop a meaningful and coordinated strategy towards Ukraine to support it, protect from Russian expansion, aggression, intrusion, invasion, interference, whatever the word you choose? How to help Ukraine return Crimea that was annexed as shamelessly as Kuwait was taken over by Saddam Hussein back in 1990. As far as I'm concerned, I don't see any difference between these two historic events. I think that Andrei Portov of Humboldt University in Berlin, whom I personally consider one of the most thoughtful historians of the present time, made a very good point. The worst thing for Europe today is not to have any strategy. I agree that, in my opinion, it's better to have a strategy that many of us, Ukrainian citizens and citizens of other countries who wholeheartedly support Ukraine in its strive toward European integration and independence, do not like, rather than not have any strategy at all. And at the moment, I'm not a diplomat, and I'm not a politician, and I'm not a member of the parliament. I'm just a journalist, but this gives me an advantage of talking about certain things in straight terms, about the things that politicians, diplomats, party leaders, representatives of the parliaments usually try to wrap into vague terms of political correctness. I think that at the moment such strategy does not exist. And well, sadly, today very little was said. I've heard many fascinating things, and I've been making notes throughout the day, but very little was said, sadly, about the major topic of the conference. Is such a solidarity possible or not? And let's call a spade a spade. Too many people today are openly speaking in favor of lifting the sanctions introduced against Russia over the Ukrainian crisis, or in favor of lightening or suspending some of the sanctions. Well, just a short extract from a letter published recently on the opinion page of the Financial Times. There's no solution to the Ukrainian crisis other than a negotiated compromise with Russia, no matter how distasteful it may be. A peace that comes with a federal system. I can give you a long list of such citations from some of the leading media of the world that shows that there's no unity among the politicians and the intellectuals of the West. Recently, I visited Washington, D.C., and some of the very influential representatives of the foreign policy community also expressed their dissatisfaction with the sanctions imposed on Russia, and were wholeheartedly talking about some kind of a compromise with Mr. Putin. And too many politicians are trying to understand Putin, to understand Russia. There's even an expression in Germany, Versteiger, Putin Versteiger. And many people are saying that sanctions, other tough measures are only provoking Russia's president to further raise his stakes in the dangerous game he is playing in the eastern Ukraine, in Donetsk and Lugansk region. And the result of such measures or further sanctions would be only continued and increased tension. In my opinion, such an approach is the same policy of appeasement. Appeasement that did not work in a different age, in a different Europe back in the end of 1930s, and will not work today. I think that it was a mistake on the part of the West, European Union, United States, to pursue a policy of not noticing, not paying attention, closing their eyes on all the bad things that were happening in Putin's Russia throughout last 15 years. Trying to convince themselves that these bad things are not relevant, sporadic. We should not criticize Putin, we should not anger him, we should engage him in good things, otherwise we'll alienate him or lose him at all. I think that was a mistake, because I'm convinced every kind of a compromise on the part of the West, Europe, the United States, will be always perceived by Russia's president as a show of weakness, as another sign of surrender. I think that Russia's president is thinking about world politics in terms of zero-sum game. He is a power freak, so to say. He always said that the weak are beaten, you should be strong. And if somebody is incapable of standing up to him, he will despise this politician, this political force, this government, and only go further. Look at what happened in Crimea. After Putin has taken the peninsula, annexed it without a single shot, he thought that Ukraine is weak, that the West is weak, that the supporters and the champions of Ukrainian independence and European choice are weak, and escalated Russian intrusion in the east of the country. Thus, we've got the continuing instability and crisis in Donetsk and Lugansk region that can develop into a frozen conflict. Saying all that, I repeat again that I'm I will be happy if the participants of this panel will try to answer the basic questions that are probably very simple and very transparent. Is Europe capable of helping Ukraine, protecting Ukraine economically, financially, politically, and probably militarily, if it comes to the need of military help? Will Europe be able to comprehend that the conflict over Ukraine is about the fate of European civilization, about the values on which the good old continent is based? That Putin's Russia is a threat today to all those values that we, I hope, still cherish. Saying all that, I pass the microphone to Petras Auštrevičius, who is a member of European Parliament. Am I correct? The member of the European Parliament on the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. If you can express your opinion on these issues, I will be most grateful. I think that, before you start, I think that we should limit every person to, say, 8 minutes. That will leave us with enough time to question and to the final remarks from the organizers of this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to have been invited to speak before you today about Ukraine and how a united Europe might best act to support the country during this difficult time. In my speech, I should like to make 2 suggestions about how Europe might lend its support to Ukraine. However, to begin with, I should like to stress something of the importance of the association agreement with Ukraine. Then I shall go on to suggest the appointment of a special representative, and to finish with, I believe that the institution of the series of committee hearings devoted to examining human rights violations in eastern Ukraine and Crimea should represent a significant step forward. To begin with, the importance of the association agreement with Ukraine. This agreement represents a qualitative basis on which future relations between the EU and Ukraine can be built, and at the same time an effective means of deepening ties between the 2 regions. I am optimistic that agreement will contribute directly and immediately to furthering the social and economic transformation of the country. In particular, the agreement will enable us to complete a number of market reforms based on European best practice. It will also allow for improved economic competitiveness on the part of Ukraine and for an opening up of new markets. Secondly, in addition to ensuring the transformation of the economy and of the social structure, it is necessary, I feel, to improve the nature of the coordination of EU-Ukraine relations. To this end, I would suggest to the EU, to the parts I represent, the nomination of a special permanent representative who would be responsible for overseeing the reforms that are carried out and for supplying various types of much required assistance. This assistance would include, for instance, financial assistance, administrative capacity building, and a series of sectorial reforms. The role of this special representative might be taken on by an experienced former high-level European politician. I am thinking of a figure such Carl Bildt, or why not Bernard Kouchner. Ideally, this figure would be able to navigate easily around the EU institutions and in the corridors of power in Ukraine. Finally, let me say a few words about the setting up of a series of committee hearings dedicated to examining and recording human rights questions in eastern Ukraine and Crimea. This is an area that is, and you will know currently, under Russian and separatist control, and has been subjected to flagrant human rights abuses of the most serious nature. My feeling is that these committee hearings could take place within the framework of either the Foreign Affairs Committee, AFET, or the Human Rights Committee, DROA, or both of them acting together. The purpose of these hearings would be to monitor and record the human rights abuses that have taken place and continue to take place in the eastern parts of Ukraine and Crimea in particular. I believe that such a committee would lend valuable support to Ukraine as it strives to restore sovereignty across the whole of the national territory, and indeed as the country struggles to ensure its very survival. By way of conclusion, let me just recap the main points that I have made. I believe it is necessary to build on a solid framework supplied by the association agreement in order to turn principle into practice. I also believe that a special permanent representative would have a vital role to play, and that a series of committee hearings devoted to human rights abuses would represent a significant sign of continuing European solidarity with regard to Ukraine. Thank you very much. I think I can save some time for my colleagues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. But since you've set time, let me ask you in continuation of your talk, how to secure support for the extension of the existing sanctions against Russia, or imposing further sanctions should it be needed if, for example, the Russian government continues its invasion of eastern Ukraine. How to do it when there are Polish states, like Italy, for example, when there are many voices that are calling for the return to business as usual. What would you say?
I don't take it as a provocation once you mentioned country presidency. In fact, a key word of today's discussion is solidarity. How I see solidarity and the expression of this policy line. EU came to this crisis situation unprepared, completely unprepared. We have no policy line when it comes to Russia, or I mean, at that time Russia was called even a strategic partner. How can you impose sanctions against a strategic partner? Then you have to shoot into your food. So, solidarity by enacting all possible means of influence. What happens after the crisis developed and the aggression went further on and on? In fact, from visa list extension to kind of the political sanctions, from political to economic sanctions. And this policy line still remains unfilled with probably other means of influence. So that's why EU should look at this possibility to impose other sanctions if Russia does provide an evidence of acting as it did. And finally, I would say solidarity by acting. I mean, we have too many words expressed and too many talks all the time. But it took some time for you to come to acting, from talking to acting. So that's why I don't take it as a granted that even today's sanctions will stay as long as they are needed and required. I don't believe it's not for granted. It's not a theoretical risk. We might be back to discussion on renegotiating or renewal and revision of sanctions imposed. So that's why we have to continue this discussion. Even in this house, we have a pretty big group of my colleagues who are not convinced at all, and to whom the evidence of Russian military presence in the east of Ukraine is not as a given argument. No, I mean, they refuse, to accept all evidence, I sent by email or by letters. They don't accept it. They don't see it. They say, your proof is not enough to change my opinion. I am asking, what kind of evidence you need more? Should I bring a Russian officer to you and he should disclose that he was fighting in Donbass or Lugansk? I think if our people not willing to accept reality and they still live in a pre-crisis situation and absolutely blinded and sometimes, let's be open, and influenced by the Russian money, I don't believe we have more money to change their opinion. We might have only more political position, and it takes time. So that's why all discussion we have is valuable. It's not just spending time for free. No, it's indeed important. Every word rightly expressed by you, by all panelists, have really a market to go to. Because I see still a lot of free space for those absolutely ungrounded and unrealistic opinions about Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Thank you very much. As far as Russian the facts supporting, proving Russian involvement in eastern Ukraine are concerned, in my opinion, Western politicians, European political leaders could do a lot to help this by putting pressure on the military and intelligence bodies to reveal more information that prove Russian military involvement. We hear only verbal statements and very few satellite pictures, so to say. Now I give floor to Yuriy Ruban, Ukrainian scholar who was recently appointed head of Department for Humanitarian Policy at the administration of Ukrainian President Petras Poroshenko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, dear honorable guests, let me follow the example of Mr. Kiselyov and to be brave enough, for example, beside of my official position, to name the current situation. I will include myself because of my short term being a bureaucrat. So, first of all, let me remind you that it's not only my opinion that the real aim of Russia is not Donbass and not even Ukraine, but Europe itself. It was told, I would again remind you, it was told openly in so-called Munich Putin speech, the idea of so-called concert of European countries is the real aim of Russian policy. What does it mean in current Ukrainian or European again situation? It means that Ukraine is so huge strategic prize that after getting it, the struggle for the small countries in Eastern Europe will by no means continue. And of course, sometimes it happens that fulfilling the obligations, the formal obligations, can become really meaningful. I would remind you, sometimes I read the memories of General Weygand, who was French commander, chief of staff in 1939. In the spring of 1939, he went to Warsaw to give formal guarantees for Poland from France before German invasion. And in his memories, he wrote that he went to Warsaw, and he, of course, signed all necessary agreements, but he was perfectly aware of the fact that nobody will fulfill these guarantees. So this is I guess this is the situation that cannot be repeated in Europe anymore. And speaking about this situation, let me remind that there is some story or some history before Putin invasion to Crimea, before Putin invasion to eastern Ukraine, and so on. In my opinion, it's not the crisis in Europe after 2008. I consider that it's not simply a financial crisis, it's much more complicated issue. And this invasion into Ukraine is not pure coincidence. I would say that there is something of Putin considered, really considered that European solidarity in such a complicated situation is big enough to, for example, to propose something like a deal for Europe. It was, as it was mentioned, something like strategic deal. For example, Russian investments, Russian money, Russian energy for these, let me say, free hands in Eastern Europe. To make a concept of European states mean the competition between Europeans for the best conditions of cooperation with Russia. This the situation. So what does it mean? I guess that we have some space for optimism. For optimism, I see that in this half a year, I see that the European leaders managed to formulate their position in this crisis. As Chancellor Merkel mentioned quite correctly, that Putin is other reality. What does it mean, other reality? He considers, and it's an interesting question, for example, psychological question, but I don't, does he really believe in what he says? But it looks like that that he really considers the Europe as the field of the eternal battle between the good and the evil, and the role of Russia is to protect these poor Europeans from evil, which is now attributed to United States, and to protect them and to propose them the return to real values. I guess he is not the first who made such proposal for Europe. Actually, it's a pure conservative revolution. This idea was very popular in the beginning of 1930s, and I guess there are a lot of memories about the, let me say, about the result of such ideas being that had been implemented by so-called constructors of such conservative values. So the threat is clear and more or less, and the question is how to oppose it. how to make the line of solidarity before such a threat. Yeah, sure. That's the point. First of all, I don't think that the answer should be in propaganda or discursive struggle. For example, trying to get the hegemony in discourse or something like this. The best example is sanctions. Sanctions is something not discursive, like money or like force or like let's say American battalions on the field of Eastern Europe. So it's not discursive items, and we see that they work. They work. We see that something stopped Putin from further invasion. It happened. Then, of course, we hope that Europe itself will manage to restore so-called transatlantic solidarity and enforce the NATO, revive NATO in Europe again. Unfortunately, for the long time, transatlantic solidarity was something like these words were eliminated from political speech. I hope this is yeah, sure. Yeah. So this, well, that's enough.
And now, let me give the floor to another representative of. Let me give the floor to another representative of the European Parliament, Ms. Gomes from Portugal. She's a socialist party member. What are your views on the number of issues that were dwelling upon?
Thank you. It's a great honor for me to speak at this conference. Thank you for the invitation. Let me recall that on the last 21st of February 2014, I was heading to Kiev, and I tweeted, 40 years ago I was heading to Praça do Chile, Lisbon. Now I'm heading to the Maidan Square. And it has a very important connection to me, because I was heading to Praça do Chile 40 years ago because I was demonstrating against colonial oppression by my own country as a fascist dictatorship, colonial oppression that was going on in Africa. And we got rid of it. And I actually was heading back to Maidan, where I'd been the months before in the delegation of the European Parliament, because I really felt that the demonstrations in Euromaidan was a genuine demonstration of the people of Ukraine against the oppression, the great and oppressive regime, the corrupt regime. And that's why I campaigned for the sanctions. We campaigned during the Parliament for the sanctions. The first targeted sanctions were very much the result of of the European Parliament's visits to Euromaidan and interaction. And of course, I didn't expect that I would see the escape of Yanukovych. And I believe that those sanctions were important, are important, will be important until indeed results are achieved. At that time, indeed, the objective was to get rid of the Yanukovych regime. Now it's much more with the developments. It's about indeed stopping the interference of Russia in parts of Ukraine, Crimea, as well the Donbass area, and not allowing it to become a frozen conflict. So I would be in favor of indeed fine-tuning the sanctions so that they will be effective and indeed hurt where they need to hurt, and that is the leadership of Russia and the cronies, and of course as much as possible not to hurt the people of Russia, because this is not about against the people of Russia. On the contrary, it's about the people of Russia as well. Actually, replying to the subject of this conference, is this a test to European solidarity? I would say this is a test indeed to our solidarity with Ukraine, our solidarity with Russia, and our solidarity among ourselves, Europeans. It's and of course I don't think that we will find a way through military means, but that means that we might be prepared as well to, if military means are used, as they are being used, to also reply on that. And we've seen, I mean, it's not just about Ukraine anymore. We have seen that other countries in the European Union feel threatened, are threatened. Even my country, so far away, has been seen overflights of Russian planes not identified. And that is a threat to our security, clearly, including our civilian aviation. So we cannot just let down and afford not to neglect as well that angle. I am one of these people who thinks that the old Latin maximum about being prepared for war, for peace, preparing peace, being prepared for war, is indeed still very relevant, and even more so when we are dealing with interlocutors such as those who are now ruling Russia. Why do we say this is about solidarity with Russia? Because of course we know very well that the kind of regime that the people in Ukraine mustered all the strength to topple is exactly the kind of corrupt regime that is in Russia and oppressing the people of Russia. Many of them might not realize at this stage. I think things will come where they will realize, and definitely the most active segments of the civil society in Russia understand that this is also about them. And I would like to say this is about indeed what Europe stands for. It's the rule of law. It's. I mean, I was even in Ukraine, I must say, stunned that so many people that I talked to were somehow accepting the notion that indeed Crimea was gone, because it's not just about Crimea and the aggression to Ukraine that it implies. Is that a major international treaty about the nuclearization of Ukraine has been proven not worth the paper where it's written. So what are the P5 doing? How can they accept that? And I think indeed we have tremendous tasks in dealing with Russia. So I'm for dialogue and in political engagement with Russia, but I'm not for us indeed succumbing to the bullying by whoever rules Russia. In what concerns our support to Ukraine, I think we have tremendous challenges. Yes, definitely Europe is able, can deliver, and I'm pretty sure that Ukraine is ready to the kind of assistance that is absolutely needed, not just for economic sustainability, self-reliance, or some independence as well on oil and gas. I would say one of the important alerts of this crisis for Europe was indeed the need to make our own members understand that they could not continue to live on the dependency of Russia, as well on what energies, and therefore the need for diversification of supply. I think we need indeed to, and we can provide a lot of support on governance, the rule of law, the basic reforms that are needed, and the rule of law includes accountability for the human rights violations occurred, as well as on corruption. Support for civil society is crucial indeed to actually tackle corruption and build governance capacities. And support for political parties, and including new emerging political parties, because one thing I felt through all the contacts I had in Ukraine was that indeed it was important to have new political forces that could really make the people of Ukraine feel represented in parliament. And they need support. And coming from a country which also had a transition towards democracy, I can assure you, we would never have made it if we didn't have all sorts of support from our partners, namely in Europe. And that support includes a lot of support for civil society capacities, for the scrutiny, for accountability, exercise of accountability. So the political foundations Europe need to play a very important role in as well supporting civil society in Ukraine. And I would say this is also indeed ultimately about us, the EU. Indeed, this is about our own values, about our own sense of purpose. That goes back to my initial comment that it was also about solidarity among the EU. I am not in the EU for a mercantilist Europe. It was the FTU some time ago wrote something, a piece about mercantilist Germany. I can extend it to a mercantilist Europe. A mercantilist Europe is the one that indeed leads to not just the best practice that we have to spread, the worst practice that we need to fight inside the EU itself. I'm talking about the tax havens or the EU financial system working as tax havens to abate the corruption, the proceeds of corruption, be it from Ukraine, from Russia, or other countries, and actually completely failing our own citizens. That is absolutely essential to change in Europe. This is also about our values. It's a crucial element for us to be effective in indeed showing our solidarity towards Ukraine and towards Russia.
Thank you very much, Anna. And now I would like to pass the floor to Refat Chubarov, member of Ukrainian parliament, one of the leaders of Crimean Tatar people, chairman of their Majlis. Tell us please about the situation in the Crimea at the moment, because this is one of the issues that in my opinion, are largely neglected by the European and world public opinion, and to my mind, too little information is given by the international media to the fact, too little attention is paid to the fact that, as a matter of fact, this political regime that has annexed Crimea is pursuing the policy which is inherited from the worst practices of Stalin's times, when Crimean Tatars were exiled from their motherland. Now, Mr. Chubarov, Mr. Jamilov, and other Crimean Tatar leaders are, in fact, banished from the peninsula. Please, Refat, the floor is yours.
Щиро дякую всім попереднім виступаючим. Дозволю собі замітити деякі інші речі. Коли ми з своїми колегами осмислюємо те, що сталося з Кримом і чому це сталося, ми майже завжди згадуємо серпень 2008 року, коли Москва здійснила агресію проти Грузії. Тоді західний світ недовго перебував в шоці, і згодом все нібито обладналося. І Путін себе відчував дуже непогано, і зв'язки були більш-менш усталеними. Все з'ясувалося, але окрім Грузії, яка втратила свої території, саме тоді ми в Меджлісі кримсько-татарського народу зайнялися питанням, а чи може щось подібне бути проти України через Крим? І якщо таке буде, хто захистить кримських татар? Ви знаєте, коли ви задаєте себе питання, хто захистить ваш народ, розуміючи, що вас всього 300 тисяч, що ви тільки через півстоліття повернулися з вигнання, і ви не можете покладатися на свою країну, Україну, оскільки ті політики, які приходили один за одним, вони в нас кримських татарах бачили потенційно сепаратистів. Вони проти нас розігрували сценарії, а сталося зовсім по-іншому. Сталося те, що кого вважали стратегічним партнером, з ким разом проти кримських татар розігрували різні сценарії, вони прийшли з бідою на кримську землю. І саме кримські татари майже єдині, я маю на увазі організовано, виступили в Криму проти російської агресії. Ви, можливо, бачили, ми тижнями показували в онлайні через телевізійний канал АТР, як це все відбувається. Наші журналісти працювали вдень і вночі. Тепер ця влада окупаційна нам мстить. Завдання помсти, покарання. Кримські татари є об'єктом, через який всьому кримському суспільству намагаються показати путінський стандарт громадського життя. Ви знаєте, тоді, коли ми думали про те, що щось подібне може бути в Криму, ми не могли подумати, що буде пряма військова агресія. Ми, як завжди, сповідували принцип ненасилля, який нам передали наші лідери за десятиліття боротьби за часи СРСР. У нас не було жодної одиниці зброї. Ми не змогли себе захистити. Але нас не зміг захистити світ. Оце є тепер шок для кримських татар. Ми дуже сподівалися в цій ситуації, в якій ми опинилися, що нас зможуть захистити, якщо не власна держава, ми розуміли всі, в якій ситуації знаходиться Україна. Ми вірили в те, що міжнародна спільнота знайде якісь механізми, щоб зупинити несправедливість. Для нас, яких вчили ще з дітьми, що ми здобудемо свою батьківщину, не беручи зброю в руки, для нас було майже, ми вірили в те, що і ЄС, ОБСЄ, нарешті ООН знайдуть якісь механізми, що Путін піде назад. Зараз говорити про те, що в Криму, я не знаю, якими словами вам це пояснити. Моя мама, як і всі кримські татари, була депортована в 11 років, і вона була дівчиною. Її звинуватили в тому, що вона була колаборанткою за часи Другої світової війни, як і всі кримські татари. Мене тепер, моя мама жива, слава Богу, їй 81 рік, мене тепер звинуватили в тому, що я є екстреміст. Вибачте, це вас звинуватили. Бо я підтримую ту позицію, яка є майже єдиною в Європейському Союзі. Я вважаю, що це була окупація з послідуючою анексією. Але мене назвали екстремістом. Тепер я знаходжусь серед своїх друзів в компанії тих, які думають так, як думаю я. Отже, я хочу, пане Євгене, завершити наступним. Якщо зараз світове товариство не знайде шляхів розв'язання цієї ситуації, якщо ми не зупинимо агресора, як було, пам'ятаєте, з Грузією в 2008, ми почекали всього 6 років. 2008, 6 років і тепер Україна. Якщо тепер ми не зупинимо Путіна, хто буде наступний через скільки років? Я впевнений, що наступний буде, якщо зараз не зупинимо агресора. Що маємо робити? Для мене це теж є такі питання, на які я намагаюся знайти відповідь. Мені здається, найголовне зараз безпека людей, які живуть в Криму. І кримських татар, і не тільки кримських татар. Там має бути постійна міжнародна місія. На першому пленарному засіданні говорили про проливи. Я це навмисно запитав. Дивіться, Росія член Організації Об'єднаних Націй. Член Організації Об'єднаних Націй. Організація Об'єднаних Націй хоча б може там зараз мати місію за моніторингом за правами людьми. Всього-навсього. Але Росія ж цього не допускає. Треба цього добиватися. Треба, щоб ті люди, які в Криму, вони хоча б знали, що міжнародне товариство наглядає за їхнім життям. Давайте не залишатиме їх закупантами один на один. Це перше. По-друге, я приєднуюсь до тих, хто говорить про санкції. А як бути по-іншому? Наш головуючий чудово, майстерно, він дав різні підходи, він спровокував нас, і за те я йому дуже вдячний. Бо якщо ми говоримо, що санкції далі провокують Путіна, знайдіть інший шлях, який зупинить Путіна. Його немає, того шляху. Ми ж маємо збільшувати санкції, щоб зупинити і змусити Путіна піти з Криму. І останнє. Кримські татари. Корінний народ півострова. Днями Путін порівняв Херсонес, сакральне значення для Росії з храмовою горою для мусульман і іудеїв. Путін дуже погано знає історію людську. Там майже 3 століття в Криму була держава кримських татар. Якщо ми можемо говорити про якусь сакральність, давайте будемо говорити про давніх греків, про скіфів, про кримських татар, але не тільки в тому значенні, в якому говорить Путін. Отже, кримські татари, які нарешті повернулися на свою батьківщину за часи і допомоги незалежній Україні. Кримські татари, які бачать своє майбутнє лише в складі української держави. Кримські татари мають бути учасниками тих переговорів і консультацій, які відбуваються щодо майбутнього Криму, щодо його сьогоднішнього стану, оскільки мова йде про майбутнє, про збереження маленького чисельного народу, 300 тисяч. Санкції, міжнародна місія, кримські татари – одні з учасників переговорів. Мені здається, це шлях, який нас виведе на вірну таку дорогу. Дуже дякую.
Now, I suggest that the next speaker be a representative of Russian media who is a famous journalist, reporter, and photographer, Viktoria Ivleva. Viktoria, the floor is yours, and before you start your presentation, let me ask you about one thing. What is the ultimate goal of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, and how well-grounded are the hopes of many Western European and American politicians to find and negotiate a compromise with the Russian president?
I think the main goal generally is to be the king in the castle. It doesn't matter where the castle is. And Ukraine is just used. And the main idea at the moment is just to destabilize Ukraine and not allow Ukraine to build a different country, free from corruption and free from just a free society, unlike the Russian one. It happens that I'm the only panelist here in this conference who is Russian and who lives permanently in Russia. I would like to say that I feel extreme guilt, and I would like to say that there are Russians who are very sorry for what is happening in Ukraine. We're with you, we're fighting for you with our small means, which we are trying to do something. Excuse us. Speaking about European solidarity, I would like to direct your attention to the year 2012, when on the 24th of December, the State Duma signed the law that is known as Dima Yakovlev law, and with 16 votes against, and on the 30th of December, President Putin signed the law. This law was a sort of Russian response to Magnitsky Act signed by President Obama. The main part of this law was actually the part that banned Americans from adopting Russian orphans. To understand how big is the issue, I will just tell you that during the 20 years of Russian-American adoption, Americans adopted 60,000 of Russian orphans. So 60,000 children were saved from Russian orphans that are nothing but vile places not for children to live in. Believe me, I've been to many of them. The process of adoption is very long and complicated, and I won't go into the detail, but there is a certain moment when children are introduced to former parents, and they have to spend about a week together, and then the parents write a consent. So when President signed this law, there were about 300 children who got in touch with their former American parents, and then those parents just escaped, and no one ever explained to the children what had happened to the parents. I would say it's a story of a new king, Herod, and it's a crime against little innocent children. 38 parents went to Strasbourg, and the case is still there, and we're waiting for the European Court reply. Did anyone in Europe support the parents? Did anyone in Europe raise their voices against what Russia did to innocent orphans? We tried hard to drag European press attention to it. Whenever you tell the story, people feel for you. People feel for the orphans. And then they say, is my country involved? No, it is not. Okay, then we won't write a story because it's not interesting, because it's between Russia and America. This was, why am I talking about this law? Because I think it was the first time when President Putin realized that we managed to do something against Americans. We grabbed them. They're here with these children, the orphans. This is it. And nothing happened. The world swallowed it. The Europe, my beloved Europe, swallowed it. And when you say, and it's still swallowed by the Europe, and there is no reply from the European Court. It's 2 years already. We're still waiting, and the children are still in the vile places throughout Russia. I visit them from time to time, so I know what I'm talking about. Just several days ago, I was in Chechnya, in Grozny. It was the day of 20 years of the beginning of the first Chechen war. I was in Chechnya this day. Just to find out that in the whole republic, there is not a single monument to people who died in Chechnya, to peaceful people, to children who died, to people who escaped and no one knows their destiny and their fate. There's nothing in Chechnya about this. Russia never repented. The Chechens and Russians who lived in Chechnya, they're our citizens, they're Russian citizens, they're not from another country. Russia is not repenting. This is not Russian style. So you expect Russia would repent talking about Ukraine? Are you joking? This is not what Russia would ever do. Russia understands, unfortunately, the Russia that President Putin built now understands only fists, strength, big boys talking in big voices. I was brought up in European culture, and I would say everyone in Russia was brought up in European culture, definitely not on Chinese or Indian one. We didn't read Ramayana when we were children. We didn't read Chinese fairy tales. We've been reading Cinderella. And I'm sure if you ask even President Putin what was his first children's book, it would be Le Petit Chaperon Rouge, the Little Red Riding Hood, Krasная Шапочка. And we are all Europeans. This is why I personally, and we were also taught geography at school. And geography told us that Europe ends on the Ural Mountains, and Ural Mountains are in Russia. So I don't understand those sayings, Russia and Europe, or Europe against Russia. Russia is Europe. You should understand it. It's one continent. It's one culture. We were all brought up in this culture. We read, I'm sure, we read the same books. I read Dickens all my childhood. Nobody's more European than Dickens, I would say. So there's nothing to discuss. What prevents Europe from taking something like Marshall Plan for Ukraine? What is it? the big monsters in Euro Parliament, like the founders of the European Union, do they prevent you from doing it? Even this conference was organized by the new members, by Lithuania and Poland. It is not backing by France, it's not backing by the Netherlands, it's not backing by Spain. Why? I have more questions than answers. What prevents you from taking Marshall Plan for Ukraine? The Russian oligarchs who bought, I don't know how many percentage of your countries already, or Russian oligarchs who live in United Kingdom, my favorite, or Roman Abramovich, what? Or the Ketchum agency, who is doing the PR politics and strategy for President Putin? No question, no answers, just questions. 20 years ago, it just happened. I was the only Russian journalist who visited the war in Rwanda. It just happened. And I remember that the war in Rwanda was very fashionable war because people from all over the world came in. There were more journalists probably, not more, but a horrible amount of journalists, an unnecessary amount of journalists were there from all over the world. In Yugoslavian war, there were loads of journalists from all over the world. There are hardly any foreign journalists in Ukraine. Ukraine is not on the front pages of European press. And don't tell me that it is. If the public opinion is not for Ukraine, that means that it is not on front pages enough to build the public opinion for Ukraine. Ukraine chosen Europe as European civilization, and you are not trying to help. What is this? Is this called solidarity? I'm sorry for being so passionate. Ukraine has become part of my life. And with my friends, we are trying to do little things like collecting money to buy diapers for handicapped people in Ukraine and ship them there. It's nothing comparing to what the European Union could do to Ukraine. I would like to finish my speech with a quotation from Mikhail Bulgakov, Russian writer who was born in Kiev. Cowardness, he said in Master and Margarita, is the worst of human vices. Get up, Europe. Help Ukraine.
And now the floor passes over to one of the most well-known and influential journalists from Lithuania, Rimvydas Valatka, whom I ask from the very beginning to try to answer one question, whatever you are going to say in your presentation, but try to answer this. Why Ukraine disappeared from the headlines of the major world media? We all remember that Ukraine was in the headlines of the news bulletins, on all major television stations, on the front pages of the most influential newspapers, on the covers of weekly magazines, and now it's all gone. Why?
Firstly, I very apologize. I will speak in Lithuanian because I hate mistakes. Labai geras klausimas, kodėl pranyko. Todėl, kad Ukraina trukdo. Kai prieš 25 metus aš buvau išrinktas į Lietuvos parlamentą, kuris paskelbė nepriklausomybę Lietuvos, mums Vokietijoje, Prancūzijoje ir kitose šalyse labai aiškiai į akis sakė: jūs trukdote Gorbačiovui. Dabar Ukraina irgi trukdo, tik nebe Gorbačiovui, nesakyt, kad Putinui trukdo būtų negražu. Dabar iš esmės Ukraina turi suprasti, kad ji trukdo didžiajam Vokietijos ir Italijos ir kitų šalių bizniui daryti biznį su Rusija. Geras klausimas dėl pasaulio mass-media yra ir todėl, kad, pavyzdžiui, tai, kaip vadinasi mūsų konferencijos dalis, The role of European Union in solving Ukrainian crisis, yra neteisingas dalykas. Kodėl? Todėl, kad nėra jokios Ukrainos krizės. Ukrainos krizė buvo iki to momento, kai pabėgo Janukovič. Kai pabėgo Janukovič, labai greitai prasidėjo Rusijos karas prieš Ukrainą. Tai yra pats tikriausias karas, kuriame žūsta tūkstančiai kareivių ir tiek pat civilių gyventojų. Tai yra Rusijos ir Rusijos kolaborantų karas prieš Ukrainą. Kai pasaulio žiniasklaida pripažins šitai, o jį pripažins turbūt tik tada, kai ir šitame name sėdinti žmonės ir kituose parlamentuose sėdinti žmonės daiktus pradės vadinti tikraisiais vardais. Tai yra ne krizė, nepainiokim žmonių, nepadėkim Putinui daryti propagandos, tai yra Rusijos karas prieš Ukrainą. Ir todėl galiu pakartoti, Europa nieko negali padėti sprendžiant šitą Ukrainos problemą. Prieš 20 metų Europa nesugebėjo išspręsti problemos, kai nedidelė Serbija užpuolė dar mažesnę Bosniją ir žudė žmonės. Kur Nyderlandų kareiviai buvo Srebrenicoje, visi turbūt prisimenam. Tai jeigu Europa tuomet nesugebėjo nieko išspręsti, ar ji gali išspręsti ką nors dabar? Europos Sąjunga kaip tokia turbūt nenori matyti Ukrainos ir dabar, nors Ukraina ir didelė yra. Apskritai, kas yra Europos Sąjunga? Kiek joje yra žmonių suinteresuotų Ukrainos laisvę? Šitame parlamente yra apie 120-140 narių, tokių kaip Marine Le Pen. Kas penktas Europos parlamento narys iš esmės yra laisvės priešas. Kai klausiausi diskusijų, šiandien ne kartą prisiminiau vieną autorių, jūs labai puikiai žinot, tai Friedrich von Hayek ir jo knygą The Road to Serfdom. Iš esmės, ta knyga parašyta tuoj po antrojo pasaulinio karo, bet jos teiginiai šiandien Europai tinka dar kartą labiau. Kodėl? Trumpai kalbant, galima pasakyti, kad lygybės troškimas sužlugdė laisvės viltį. Ir tai labai tinka Europos Sąjungai. Lygybės ir gero gyvenimo noras palaidojo laisvę. Apskritai, kai kalbam apie solidarumą, žmogaus protas yra labai prisitaikantis dalykas. Mes šiandien netoli Prancūzijos, 1,5 valandos kelio geležinkeliu, kalbam apie solidarumą su Ukrainos tauta, kuri yra užpulta didesnės agresorės. Bet gretimoje valstybėje yra pastatyti 2 Mistral tipo laivai. Ar mes, europiečiai, turime teisę kalbėti apie solidarumą su Ukraina, kai nepardavę Ukrainai ne vieno šautuvo, mes žadam parduoti 2 didžiulius kovinius laivus? Ar galima kalbėti apie solidarumą su Ukraina, kai mes turime tokį nuostabų europietį kaip Gerhard Schröder, kuris dirba tarnu pas Putiną? Jis dirba tarnu pas Putiną. Ir aš kaip europietis galvoju, jeigu nebūtų Mistral statybos laivų, po to, kai įvyko 3 karai, 2 karai prieš čečėnų tautą, 1 karas prieš Gruziją, ir štai vieni iš signatarų ES prancūzai nusprendžia agresorių apginkluoti dar geriau, kad jis karus vykdytų greičiau ir matyt sutaupytų ir resursų, ir aukų. Po 3 karų yra Mistral. Šrioder dirba ir toliau Rusijai, Putinui ir gauna kiek ten, 1 milijoną eurų per metus. Apskritai kalbėti apie solidarumą galima būtų tik po to, kai mes visi europiečiai pripažintume gėdą šitų 2 dalykų. Ir ne tik šitų, matyt, reiktų pripažinti. Baigdamas, vis tiek norėčiau atsakyti į klausimą, kas išspręs karo problemą Ukrainoje. Mes, europiečiai, jos tikrai neišspręsim. Tikiu 2 dalykais. Tikiu pirmuoju, Ukrainos tauta. Ukrainos tauta karo dėka baigia susiformuoti. Ir ji iš tiesų yra patriotiškesnė ir kovingesnė už daugelį mūsų tautų šiandien. Antras dalykas, kuris padės tai išspręsti, yra laikas. Laikas yra ir geras dalykas, ir labai baisus. Kodėl kalbu apie laiką? Todėl, kad kiekviena diena, kurią Rusija pragyvens vadovaujama Putino ir jo klikos, priartina Rusijos kaip valstybės žlugimą ir ko gero skilimą į keletą dalių. Tai iš esmės laikas šiuo atveju žaidžia ir Ukrainos naudai. Blogai yra tai, kad imperija arba postimperija neaišku, kada žlugs. Ta pati Sovietų Sąjungos imperija galėjo žlugti tuoj po Stalino mirties 53, ji galėjo žlugti 1973, bet tada pakilo naftos kainos ir pratęsė agoniją ir ji žlugo tik 91 metais. Tiek Europos Sąjungai, tiek Ukrainai, tiek savo asmeniškai linkiu, kad arba Rusija tegu atsisveikina su Putino klika, arba Rusijos nebus, kad ir kam ji Europoje taip labai patinka. Ačiū.
Thank you very, very much. Let me remind you that we started this final session half an hour later than scheduled, and we were supposed to work for 35 more minutes. Frankly speaking, I'm in no mood to torture you, the people in this auditorium, but still I hope that you may have some questions. So I'm going to take 3 questions. Please introduce yourself. Yes, the girl sitting next.
Okay, thank you. My name is Ruban. Yes, I work here in the Parliament. I would like to ask actually the 2 MEPs. Indeed, some of us have brought an issue that there are, so to say, 2 separate camps. You know, the ones who really support Ukraine, the ones who go to Ukraine, who understand very clearly the situation, and these are mainly people sitting here also and participating in this type of debate. And there's other camp of people who either have already predefined position because of their close financial, whatever type of relationship with Russia, or simply choose to be ignorant and choose not to get involved. So for me, it's interesting, how can we actually bridge this bubble, you know? How can we reach out those MEPs? What measures can we, I don't know, like, how can we invite, what are your thoughts, you know? Because it's getting really boring now with so informed Western Europeans who simply agree on everything, and then when it comes to actual decision making, you know, there is a problem. And secondly, you know, Ukraine is definitely a challenge. It's a big challenge that needs a big response, a serious response to that. What is the EU, and obviously we don't have, it's very difficult to agree now on sanctions. We are working on, some are actually promoting more sanctions, others are saying there will be no sanctions. March is approaching. What are your proposals? How can we build this consensus within the EU? Can the Ukrainian government do something? Is there enough communication by the Ukrainian side? Is there enough of exchange within the EU? Where is the problem and how we can tackle it? Thank you.
Anna?
Well, you're right. There's a lot of ignorance. And I think it makes a difference to go to Ukraine, I can tell by myself. Especially when we're dealing with, indeed, the kind of PR we are dealing with from the side of Russia, spreading all sorts of propaganda and having, huge means to actually spread that propaganda. To me, it made a difference to go to Ukraine. So I can imagine that bringing more members of the parliament to Ukraine will be really very important. But probably not enough. And not as soon as we need. In this respect, I just hope that actually we won't allow that it will be put in more offensive actions again to wake up people. Because I think that even here in the parliament, many people were ignorant and indifferent once they saw actions such as, for instance, the offensive of planes, even airspace of my country became quite upset. So the question is, will that be then too late to act? And I believe, indeed, we need to counter the propaganda. We need to bring information. It's very important to bring voices from Russia itself, who really tell a different story from the one that is told in the propaganda tools of Putin. And what I would say is that it is really crucial to expose the corruption that is going on, and that explains all this mercantilist approach that actually ties the end of Europe, ties because there's no lack of capacity, there is lack of political will, because we have poor leadership. We have poor leadership as well. That's why Europe as well is stuck in this mess in terms of fighting the crisis and so on. It's not indifferent, and that's exactly the reason why, as it was said, why Putin chose to actually take on Europe, because he felt it was weak. It was weak on leadership, it was weak on the values, it was, and I'm sorry to say, this is about the individual values. What are we there for? If not to fight for democracy, the rule of law, human rights, solidarity, that economic development with principles, not just money for money, not business, not Gazprom payroll. So sorry, exposing our ties in support of those that corrupt elite is crucial. I'm talking about European ties. And and of course this defines what we are to do, how to react, how to interact with Parliament. It's not a chamber of decision, but it's a very politically important tool to press the decision makers. I believe that the 2 visits that the Parliament made to Kiev in January and February were decisive for the action that finally our member states took. And of course the infighting goes on. That means that we must be even more effective in putting the pressure so that the right decisions are made.
Thank you. You may consider this a case of nepotism, but I want to let my old friend and colleague Savik Schuster ask the question.
May I share one? I have a question to Petras Auštrevičius. it's a very good idea to have a human rights monitoring mission. That's a very good idea. The problem is that I feel how you're going to solve it. The fact is that the public opinion of New Europe is sensitive to the things that are happening in Ukraine. Public opinion of founders is not sensitive at all. We see it by what happens in the press or in electronic media. How are you going to get access to them? You cannot get access to the Russian public opinion because it's total propaganda control, and you cannot get access to public opinion in all Europe. And that public opinion really counts. Give you an example. Ukraine and Russia are very different in values. Ukraine is much more European. There are addicted people are considered in Ukraine to be patients, and they have a possibility of a methadone substitute therapy. In Russia, drug-addicted people are considered criminals, and they deserve prison, no substitution therapy. Imagine yourself those people in Crimea, for instance, or in the occupied areas in East Ukraine, who have been on that therapy, and all of a sudden they've been deprived of it. It's a very painful death. That is one of the issues, for instance, that can be very sensible in Germany and France. But the problem is that you have to pick issues. Orphans, which are not adopted in the United States, may not make headlines. Drug-addicted people who are basically sentenced to death may be an issue for old Europe, founders of the European Union. How are you going to solve this problem?
It's like we simply have a problem. And we have to recognize the magnitude of this problem as it is. It's not far away, it's close. I mean, you take a flight and in 2 hours from Brussels, you're already in Kiev, and then I don't know how many, an hour by plane, you are in the eastern part of Ukraine, where all these violations are a matter of today's life. I believe you might face a challenge, a moral challenge, to rewrite the fundamental treaties. I mean, human rights, fundamental rights, all European values are very basic of today's EU. I still believe in it. Otherwise, I would not talk or stay here. And we have to take it as it is and to move out of this box to real world and to face it, what we have in Ukraine. So I believe we have to do it, and the reason behind is not just to register, not to monitor, not to see, since we almost know what we will find over there. And probably in reality the facts will be even more tragic than even we expect. But a day X will come, and we will have to bring Vladimir Putin to the international court. And we will need evidence. And the evidence should come not just from Ukrainian human rights activists, from the Ukrainian Ministry of Justice or any institution in charge. I mean, it should come from Europe. If Europe still believes that it defends human dignity and human values. I mean, the platform on which we will base our hearings is not important at all. I mean, it might be a special commission or whatever. But if we keep eyes closed and we just follow on international press series of events, killings, deaths, and so on and so forth, we just support this tendency. If we don't do it tomorrow or the day after, it will become history. I mean, forgotten history. We have to change that history into future, not into the past. Nothing will stop Putin from doing this unless we are serious, not just, talking about sanctions. We have to go beyond sanctions. We have to activate really values, and those rights we are sitting on, and to make them a powerful weapon against those who violate. We have to make a list of violators, of those fighting on the wrong side, so to say. I mean, I don't see it, it's not one-time event. As we had excellent presentation from Crimean Tatars representatives. But it was 45 minutes at the Foreign Affairs Committee. At what? And you know how many members took part in that session? At 10? Maybe 20%? So, and nothing will follow. So we're simply getting cynical. We deceive ourselves that we are busy with something. If we believe in the European Parliament and EU future, so we have to help Ukraine. And even if that's a way, I made a proposal.
Thank you, Petras. And now, one final question. I'm very sorry. Others may approach our panel members after we wrap it all up and speak to them individually. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Olga Buluk. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Ghent here in Belgium. And I have a question about Russian civil society, and I would like to address it to Viktoria Ivleva. We hear this skyrocket support rates for President Putin, but of course we can't fully trust the public opinion surveys coming, from under the control of Russian authorities. So what is your assessment? What is the real percentage of support for Putin? And what do you think would it take to mobilize them against him in a way? Because some months ago there was hope that now that, sorry, does my microphone work?
Yes.
Some months ago there was talks that now that the Russian soldiers began to die on the Ukrainian soil, that the organization of soldiers' mothers would somehow mobilize protest. Then later people were speaking now of the devaluation of Russian currency. Perhaps the people will get up in some sort of hunger protest. What do you see as a possible cause, as a possible trigger for a protest in Russia? Thank you.
I don't see anything. I see a black hole in front. The only hope is that in 1917, when the revolution in Russia happened, it was how many were the Bolsheviks? 200, 300 Bolsheviks who seized the power? So, I don't know. But I think the percentage is close to what is shown, 80 or whatever. But if you count not in percentage, but in people, we are 15 million who are against. 15 million is more than in some European countries. We're still there. We're alive.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for your last point. That was, no, this is very optimistic because, as a matter of fact, I wanted to abuse my powers as the moderator of this panel and make a couple of remarks. And one of the remarks that I was intending to make was about the Russian public opinion. Because, well, let's remember the events of 1991, when the coup, the attempted coup, took place in Moscow, in the former Soviet Union. As a matter of fact, huge majority of the Soviet people were silent, unfortunately. We have to remember that and face this historic reality. But several 100,000 of people who took to streets in Moscow, in Kiev, and in St. Petersburg turned into a decisive force that defeated the coup plotters. And the defeat of the coup plotters led to the disintegration of the Union and to the fall of the communist regime. So that's why, even if 13%, only 13% of Russian citizens are against Mr. Putin, though all the polls carried out under the conditions of a neo-authoritarian regime are senseless and prove nothing. But even if they are accurate, 15%, even more, 18% of Russians, and they are mainly living in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other major cities of Moscow. It's more than enough. The big problem that they do not have access to media, and they are marginalized as political powers. They do not take part in the elections, they are not represented in the parliament, and that makes their goal very difficult. Saying that, I wanted to make another point. We spoke very little about the media. It's a topic that would be a matter of a separate conference, a separate discussion. Excuse me if I will say something which is completely politically incorrect, but the West in general and Europe in particular are losing informational war to Russia. Look at the Russia Today project. It's a television station which is budgeted heavily by the Russian government. Hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on this project every year. And in every European capital, in every major American city, Russia Today is, so to say, broadcasting from every wall electric socket. Something should be done about that. And with all my due respect to the freedom of speech, to the freedom of the press, I think the West in general should think about extending the sanctions to the Russian media, which are no longer the media, but propaganda too. But I said that when speaking in Washington to some members of the State Department staff, they said, look, it's completely, well, this is unacceptable. We have the First Amendment, we cherish the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press. I said, okay, but can you imagine an English language edition of Folkische Beobachter being distributed in the United States or in the United Kingdom during the Second World War? Silence. And finally, today we spoke a lot, many speakers today referred to different historic examples and to different historic arguments. Just a thought that occurred to me, a thought for the day, so to say. Here, there are many journalists and many public speakers. Next time, when you hear from a Russian representative something like that, then he will try to justify Russian claims to the Crimea by saying that Crimea is a land of Russian military glory. Remind that man that, as a matter of fact, it's a land of Russian military defeats. A number of them, including one major, probably the worst defeat in history. Crimean War lost in mid-19th century. And I'd like to remind you that after that war that was lost by Russia, Russian government had to start political and economic reform. And I hope that this war, when it is lost by Moscow, will also change Russia for the better. Thank you very much. And let me give the floor in the very end of today's conference to one of the organizers, Ivleva Nikšentaitis, who represents the organizers.
Ich würde ja auf Deutsch ein paar Wörter sagen. Also zum Schluss wollte ich eigentlich nur sehr herzlich allen bedanken, die hier gekommen sind. Es war für uns eine besonders große Ehre, aber auch gleichzeitig sehr wichtig, diese Tagung hier im Europaparlament durchzuführen. Es gibt viele Gründe, warum es uns das so wichtig war. Ich würde nur einen Grund nennen. Als wir diese Tagung geplant haben, wir haben dann eigentlich nach Ort gesucht und dann haben wir Ort nach europäischen Kriterien ausgegeben. Es wurde hier sehr viel gesprochen und das sehen wir auch in unseren Ländern genauso. Es gibt in Europa sehr viel Russland verstehen. Eigentlich wegen diesem Wort Russland verstehen, wegen diesem Begriff habe ich diese deutsche Sprache ausgesucht, weil in keinem anderen Wort wahrscheinlich dieses Begriff Russland verstehe existiert nicht als Sprache. Es ist alles eigentlich sehr schön. Nur wenn wir mit Russlandsversteher sprechen, dann reden sie in Beziehungen mit Deutschland, Russland, Frankreich, Russland. Und oft in diesen Gesprächen fehlt dieses Zwischenland. Und dieses Zwischenland ist eben Weißrussland, Ukraine, auch oft früher war es auch Polen, baltische Staaten und so weiter. Wir sind nicht Russland verstehen, aber mit solcher Taten, wir wollen eigentlich etwas anderes in Bewegung setzen, dass auch in der Europäischen Union mehr Ukraine entstehen können. Und deswegen, was wir heute angefangen haben, ich glaube, das ist eigentlich nur Anfang von einem sehr, sehr langen Weg. Und deswegen nochmals herzlichen Dank, dass Sie hier gekommen sind und dass Sie die ganze Zeit mit uns verbracht haben.